So there can be as many different ways of approaching a subject as there are individuals. I had a lot of people accuse me over years of doing more of a tech school approach. Well, I guess it was because I went to a technical high school and then also went to tech school in the military, and then went to tech school when I got out of the military to get my engineering background and my broadcasting background to become a person that worked in radio and television. It was only when I went back to school that I got an academic approach to it, because I wanted to learn how to package that which I already had been doing professionally. And so when I went into the academic world here at SFA, University of North Texas, Xavier of Ohio, University of Oklahoma, wherever it was always to prepare students for a career in that field. Because not everybody that's going to get in radio, television, and film was going to be an actor. If they weren't, go to the drama department. If they really wanted to learn how to do film, then go do it. You don't need a degree, because let's face it, a liberal arts degree, about 3 years of that degree is in the other stuff, and then about a year in your major discipline. So I said, if your driving desire is to go work in whatever, then go do it. And so I had many students that struggled through the last few years of their degree because they were already working professionally. This happened in Oklahoma, happened in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and other places. Even here at SFA, it was considered KTRE television was my lab, because I had so many of my students working there, from the news director to camera operators and on and on. So there's a lot of ways of approaching this, what we're doing in here. You have a manual, and my subject tonight is the Doctrine of God, number 2. You can read this. I've read it. It's very well done. It starts out with the memory verse. Indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what's his name? Because keep in mind, at that time, there were a lot of gods. They were in Egypt with all these gods. The cat god, all the gods. And so they're saying, if I go back to them and they say, who sent you? Which of the many gods sent you? He said, tell them, I am. So God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So you can read through that, the names of God. It's interesting when we talk about names, the names that we have. Sometimes our names are meaningful. I talked to this Native American this afternoon at the prison, and we were talking about names. He told me his name. He said, my name among my family and the elders is Coyote Who Laughs. And so you have these various names, and he said sometimes we had white people that were non-Indian at all that wanted to join our circle when we were at the prison, and it was open for everybody. He said, and they wanted to give themselves names like War Eagle or Hunting Hawk or something. He said, you can't name yourself, not among the Native Americans. And then we had a further conversation. It was interesting because sometimes those names were names that the elders had to verify, had to say, yes, that's your name. That's what you're called. And then sometimes, and he told me this, he said, sometimes the names that you're called by your buddies and your friends, sometimes you don't even want to talk about that in public, but it's that nickname your buddies call you, your friends. And he named some of those, and I thought, well, that's wrong. Who wants to be called that? Anyway, so you can't assume a name. So one time, we were at a conference, and Dr. Jack Taylor was there. And he was saying, how does God see you? What's your name? What does he see you as? What's his affectionate name for you? And so I grew up Jean. I never liked it because it was always being misspelled. Jean, Jeanne. It's close to your name. But it was Jean, Gene, and it came from my mother, Eugenia. So I was named after my dad, Paul. He had no middle name. My mother, Eugenia, and so it came out as Paul Eugene Potter. And interestingly, my dad did not want to have two Pauls in the house. Then I always thought, when I got old enough to think about it, then why did you name me Paul? And so when I joined the Air Force, I became Paul. And I still have some relatives that call me Gene, because they've known me that for many, many years. But I moved into the name Paul. And I think I've shared with this group, it wasn't until I came to this church that I really accepted part of God's calling on my life as an apostolic calling. And I really had rejected that for years, because I just thought that was something beyond anything I would ever claim for myself. But I do see that there's somewhat of an apostolic calling in that most of my college career was setting up programs, going someplace because I knew what I was doing to set up a radio, television, film operation, or going to Xavier and setting up their television operation. And while I was there, being hired to help set up the interactive cable division for Warner Communications in Cincinnati. And so it was always kind of building something, and there was always somewhat, Tanya can attest to this, there was this discontent, because once it was set up, then what's next? You know, where do we go now? What else is out there on the horizon? And I guess it was taking the test that we do here, spiritual gifts, and I could talk on and on about giftings, but I really said, I accept that, because what I'm doing here at the prison, here, Icon, a couple of other locations, is setting up ministries. So I can see a bit of the apostolic calling on that. So when I come into something like this, I'm saying, okay, we have this and it's good. You can read that. Anybody ever read tonight's lesson yet? I know some don't, some ahead of time. But anyway, the names of God. You know, how does he see you? What's the name? So when Jack Taylor was teaching that weekend, I said, God, how do you see me? What's my name? Now, not anymore, because I don't have the balance and all for it, but I used to dance with the Kiowas and Comanches. I powwowed with them. And somehow or another, Walt Disney got a picture of me at one of those, and I'm doing one of the, and I had the full regalia on, the dance bustles and all that, and was offered a job working in their Indian village out there. And I thought, well, how cool will that be? And then on a phone call, someone asked me, said, well, what tribe are you a member of? And I said, Dutch, English, Scott, Irish. And they, long pause, well, we can't have you unless you're a Native American. What, those pictures? And I said, yeah, I'm blue-eyed, I'm a white guy, I am not Indian. And they said, well, we can offer you a job as a gunfighter. And see, I grew up when people were playing cowboys and Indians. I was always the Indian, always. And so for me to change at that age to become a gun, no, it wasn't for me. And I remember one night at a Sunday service when John Sheesby was talking about dancing before the Lord. We talk about worshiping before God, but how about dancing before God? I know down front, I watch these people bouncing up and down like they're on pogo sticks. I can't do that anymore. And I saw you go down there, you went off your feet about 2 inches. A couple of times.
I was jumping hard in my mind.
Yeah. Kevin went down there, and he was, but I don't do that as well anymore. But talking to this guy today, I saw him on Facebook, a Marine, fully decorated. He had all the ribbons, and this, I don't even remember what rank he was. His hat was off, he had an eagle feather fan, and he's dancing. It's still here in my spirit. It really is. But when I became a Christian, it just started conflicting with that. And then when John was talking that night, John Sheesby, about dancing before God, I went down and started dancing before God. And all of a sudden something's moving here to my side, and she said she wasn't going to let me be by myself up there. One time, and this is the last time I talk about dancing, is one time in a service, I felt the nudging of God to dance. I didn't do it often, but I felt that nudging, and I just hesitated. It's like being told to pray for somebody or witness to somebody. I was just hesitating. And they were about to fade out the song, and I said, Lord, if they played it one more time, I'll do it, I promise. And I remember Millard, who was our praise and worship leader, said, let's do that again. Okay. And when I went out to dance before the Lord, I felt like I was fumbling old fool. I really did that morning. There was no anointing on it, none. And sometimes I have, it's been such an anointing. And I went back and sat down, and I kind of like, what's that all about? You know, you made me do that, why? A lady came up to me after church and just weeping and said, I came to church today and said, if I could not see evidence of your love for me, God, I was going to go home and kill myself. And she said, when I saw you, I saw the Father dancing over me. I had to. What if I had not that day? So I have a big topic. God. Beyond our comprehension. We can go through the names, but again, it's beyond our comprehension. I start out by saying different ways of teaching. I see this, you have the manual. I expect whoever comes up here to talk out of the well of your life, whatever the topic is, to let that overflow in your own life and tell us about that. And therefore, every one of you can do this. I was told by the chaplain that the prisoners, the inmates, cannot teach in our school, ministry school at the prison. But then I asked the field minister, I said, can people give papers? Can they give topics that you give them and give reports? And he said, yes. So I'm going to have every week, every time we do it, one of those prisoners is going to take the topic and talk about it week by week. Because some of them, like the guy I talked to today, already has theology training. There's one guy that's there in the prison that has a doctorate. He was with me when I was at Hardin-Simmons University. As a student, he wasn't a teacher. I don't know why he's in prison, but he is. So there's people there that can teach, and just like you can teach. So it comes out of the well of your own experiences. Our next topic tonight is going to be salvation. You can come up here and talk about your testimony, your own salvation experience. It's for each one of us, it becomes a part of our testimony, our acknowledgement of what God has done in our lives. And then you got the book, you got the notes that you take from the lesson. Then I encourage you to go and dig it out yourself. Dig out words and its meaning. So I spent today, some of the time of day, just printing out some things about the topic of God. There's a New Testament word used for God creating all things. Genomai. Comes from John 1:3, 10, Hebrews 11:3, John 1:3, 10. Hebrews 11:3. Genomai. The word means to cause to be, to become, be created. I also pointed out that he told us to do genomai, his will. Matthew 6:10, by commanding. Obviously, we don't create matter or physical objects from nothing, as he did. We create or cause his will to be done, to manifest. And one of the ways we do so is by declaring his will in his word. Someone questioned at Icon the other night, surely God, how did he make everything out of nothing? He had to have something to start with, she asked me. And I says, well, where did the something that he started with come from? She said, I can't get my mind around it. I said, exactly. See, she's going to have to wade through that herself. That's what you do after class in your own research. Because there's some of this that you listen to the speaker and it just doesn't make sense until you dig it out and ask the Holy Spirit to teach it to you. God and his word are one. He is his word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:1. This is why his words are filled with such power. They flow from the essence of who he is. The Passion Translation states regarding Genesis 1:3, God created light, but did not create the sun until the fourth day. Incredible. God himself filled the universe with light of his presence and glory. The same translation continues by explaining the Hebrew verbs used with the phrases let there be and there was are both related to the holy name Yahweh. Let there be. Wahi. And there was. As Yahweh spoke, the essence of his created being flowed from him into the universe. The I Am released his nature with the words light be. And light became. There's no one like God. There was a moment when Moses had the nerve to ask God what his name was. And we saw that earlier. But we also saw the reason why. There's a lot of gods back then, a lot of small g's. And I could go, there's quite a bit of writings about that, about the round table in heaven and the gods that be. And you see that in Job when Satan, Lucifer, comes before God as the other gods are meeting. What's that all about? So Moses had the nerve to ask God what his name was, and God was gracious enough to answer, and the name he gave is recorded in the original Hebrew as YHWH. Over time, we've arbitrarily added an A and E in there to get Yahweh, presumably because we have a preference for vowels, especially in the English language. But scholars and rabbis have noted that the letters YHWH represent breathing sounds or aspirated consonants. When pronounced without intervening vowels, it actually sounds like breathing. YH, inhale, do it with me. Exhale. YH, inhale. WH, exhale. So a baby's first cry, his first breath, speaks the name of God. He inhales and exhales. He takes in the breath of God, inhales the breath of God, and exhale, and it comes out as a cry. A deep sigh calls his name. A groan or a gasp that is too heavy for mere words, it calls out his name. Even atheists speak his name, unaware that the very breath that they breathe is giving constant acknowledgement of God every breath that you take. Likewise, a person leaves this earth with their last breath, and they're gone, taking their next breath in his presence. So when I can't utter anything else, is my cry calling out his name? Being alive means I speak his name constantly with every breath I take. So is it hard, the loudest, when I'm quietest? In sadness, we breathe heavy sighs. In joy, our lungs feel almost like they will burst. In fear, we hold our breath and have to be told to breathe slowly to help us calm down. When we're about to do something hard, we take a deep breath to find courage. When I think about it, breathing is giving him praise, even in the hardest moments. This is so beautiful, fills me with emotion every time I grasp the very thought God chose to give himself a name that we can't help but speak every moment we're alive. All of us, everyone on the face of the earth, always, everywhere, waking, sleeping, breathing with the name of God on our lips. And faith, let's face it, I think I've shared this with you before, is an endless well of frustration. Yahweh, our English pronunciation, is not like our ancestral idols, our hand-carved household deities that promise grain and fertility and health if only we splatter some blood on the altar, fork over some grain to the priest. Daily we experience the vexation of worshiping a God who simply will not do what we want him to do. He acts like God, will not conform to the ideologies we subscribe to, will not heal when we summon him or move at our decrees. First he says, I am one. Then he says, I'm three. First he comes to us as a roaring lion, and then as a bleating lamb. The majestic king seated on the throne commands our respect, blazing with glory, thundering with authority. But what we're to make of this baby lying in a feeding trough, sleeping soundly amid the thick smells of manure and squalor in a barn. How do we resolve this triune conflict? Alas, faith brings far less resolution than we hope for, and far more perplexity, far more paradox, far more tension, far less hallmark, and a whole lot like black comedy. God is the unsolved mystery, the unworkable equation, the unknown variable that destroys all of the formulas. If you don't think so, study quantum physics. That'll blow your mind. But take heart. Mystery is the soil out of which wonder grows. And where is the wonder? Where is the worship? Where there is awe, there is adoration. And interestingly, some words have changed over time. At one time, we could call him wonderful and awful. Awful. Well, see, originally, wonderful, full of wonder, and awful, full of awe, were similar words. Where did they change? Many a prophet has been birthed from the womb of perplexity. Don't try to fix the problem. What you call a problem may be the subtle whisper of the Spirit that invites you to surrender your conundrums and your quandaries to this 3-1 lion, lamb, king, baby, God, man, who's working all things for good. Now we see through a glass darkly. Stop scrubbing the glass with Windex and take the outstretched hand that pulls you kicking and screaming deeper into the blessed darkness of life in the Spirit. Worship in riddles. Break forth in unknown tongues as you groan for the new creation. Christ, our great enigma, our unsolvable riddle, our great mystery, our great and glorious God. The only one worthy of our dizzy, bewildered praise, both now and forevermore. I went through some struggles this week, just spiritual battles. And I don't know if it was last night or this morning, I got up and pulled out a book that I wanted to reread. I've read it before. Need to read it again. Anybody familiar with Henri Nouwen? Henri Nouwen. Oh, do I have somebody to introduce you to? Henri, 2 middle initials, J.M., Nouwen, N-O-U-W-E-N. This is called The Return of the Prodigal Son. The writer in the foreword says it's the best book he's ever read. The foreword was written by a Catholic priest who said when he was in final days of his spiritual journey of becoming a priest, he was in a week retreat and went into the library and pulled down this book that was dusty, only just a few years old. And he said it gave him definition and meaning for the rest of his spiritual journey. He quotes a couple of phrases from Nouwen. One of them is this: complaining is self-perpetuating and counterproductive. Whenever I express my complaints in the hope of evoking pity and receiving the satisfaction I so much desire, the result is always the opposite of what I tried to get. Not only does it turn people against you, as he explains later, it also extinguishes the desire for gratitude to God. He says this also, whereas a strictly worded definition closes the mind. In other words, you look up a definition. Sometimes people want to say, well, what do I say to a person that needs to become a Christian? How do I pray that prayer? What's the formula? There ain't one. I think you've heard it from our pulpit. I know I've heard it many times. There's no such thing as a sinner's prayer. It's you believe in your heart and what? Confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's it. There's one guy one time that was hanging on a cross and said, today, remember me in paradise. That was his sinner's prayer. And what did Jesus say to him? Today, you'll be there with me. Wow. Sinner's prayer? I put it in my book, a sinner's prayer, but sometimes we need some guidance. But there's no formula. And so Jesus answered questions how? Parables. In the same way, there can be a great variety of teaching methods. In the same way, a great many definitions of parables. This is one whole book that explains through a picture and through a story out of Luke, the prodigal son. Now, I know this is not popular among people of the religious persuasion in the church that I'm in right now, but I believe, when I grew up believing, that once you become a Christian, you are forever and ever. Amen. You cannot walk away from it. Why? Because you have been grafted into. You have been adopted into God's family. You can become a renegade, a prodigal, going out and living in the pig pens, which Jews should not do. Squander all your money on riotous living and prostitutes. And still come back to the Father. And what does the Father do? He runs and greets you. He won't even let you finish your confession. I mean, that's the God that's my Father. And when I prayed, ended my prayer, and I said, Abba, Father, I wish I had the notes that I did this in prison the other night. It's not daddy, a familiar term. It is the same term that in, anybody military? Anybody? You were? Sir, yes, sir. The guy gave the description of Father in this way. He was arriving in Tel Aviv for a ministry visit. He had been held up in the, what do you call it when you have to show your passport and all that? Security and going through all that. And he really needed to go to the bathroom, and he went to the bathroom, and there was an elderly Jewish gentleman with what was obviously his son, or maybe even a grandson, small, helping him wash his hands. And that tender little time when you're teaching a child. And he said, call me Abba, Father. In other words, I'm here to obey you and do what you say, but with great respect and admiration, because you're my teacher. You're the one that protects me and wants to. And so there's more to it than just a simple daddy. It's a profound name if you look it up in the Hebrew and what it means. And so this is the story of a younger son, the elder son, and the father. And what Henri Nouwen was doing in his life, he was a professor at Harvard University. Jesuit training, also a doctorate in psychology, and he's teaching at Harvard. But he goes to a retreat to spend some time in Holland. He's Dutch background himself. And it was a home for the mentally challenged. He goes back to Harvard, and he's been looking for home. He had just finished a 6-week mission where he's really talking about supporting the people that have been oppressed in Central America by wars and revolution and what have you, and asking churches and people to help assist in what's going on in South America. And he came back and he was exhausted. He said, well, I was there, I was pumped up, I was really with it, but when I got back, I was exhausted. And I'm sitting there in the room of one of the people that helped run this center for handicapped people, mentally challenged people. And he said, I noticed this poster on the wall, and it was a poster of Rembrandt's The Prodigal Son. And he said, it drew me in with such a sense of longing for the hands of the Father to be on my shoulders in the same way the prodigal coming back to the Father. I needed that. He said, I wasn't even listening to the person that was there giving me this counsel and introducing me to this center. And he said, where did you get that? What is that? And she introduced him to Rembrandt's The Prodigal Son. He said, you can get the poster in Paris when you go through there on your way out. But then the story goes on. He goes back and spends some time in Harvard and realizes his calling is to go and work at that center. He resigns Harvard and goes back to Holland and spends in France and spends a year with those handicapped people and knew he was home. And he walked away from it, and the rest of his life he spent in a retreat center for the handicapped, mentally challenged in Canada. Left the position most people in academia would long to have, but went to work with people not like his students who were the elect and the very select, but he went with the mentally challenged people and poured out his life to them. Just before going there permanently, some friends asked him to go on a trip with them to Russia. And they ended up in St. Petersburg, which became Leningrad, and then it changed back to St. Petersburg. And he knew the prodigal son, the picture of it, was there in the Hermitage. Magnificent art gallery. The picture had been purchased by St. Catherine and had been placed in the Hermitage. It's 101 inches by 81 inches in size. It's a huge painting. And so he got in the mile-long queue to go into the Hermitage and take the brief tour. But then he came back and he was telling the people he was visiting with, he says, to go and just spend time in front of it. And the lady said, let me give you a phone number. She gave him the phone number of Andre, who Andre was the one who was in charge of restoration of all the works in the Hermitage. And he took him in at 2:30 in an afternoon, and he says the date. And he says he goes in and he's placed in front of the picture. The guy tells the guard, let him be. And so he said he just absorbed it. And then when he left, he said, if I could do that more. He said, come back tomorrow morning. So the next day, a different guard entirely. Instead of the guard that before let him do that, this guard was, no, you can't stand, you gotta stand over there, get out of the way. We have people coming through and all this. And so he goes and gets out of the way. Well, Andre comes to check on him and say, what are you doing over here? He says, well, the guard won't let me. And so he calls a couple of his assistants, and they go out and get a throne and brings it back and sits it in front of the prodigal son and tells the guard, you will not bother this man. And he got to spend the whole day just being drawn into. And the rest of the book is about the prodigal son and that painting. And that's how I see our Father. See, it's no matter what I've done. When I come back, I don't have to grovel. He comes running for me. He desires me more than I desire him. He desires me so much that he gave his only son. Why? To die for me. You can have him too, but he came to die for me. And you. And you. And you. If you were the only one. If you were the only one. He came to die just for you. And you. And you. And you. And that love that he has is absolutely beyond our comprehension. His goal for us, his plans for us are beyond our comprehension. The ministry goals that he has for, he says, Jesus says, greater works than I've done, you'll do. Why will you do that? Because I'm going to come back as spirit to live in your body, and you're going to walk in my authority and speak my name. And things will be. But still in the midst of all that, we're going to be perplexed. And that's what drives us back to him. Drives us back to him. Time and time again. With our groans, with our needs, with our concerns. Why? Because he is the I am that has the answers for us. It's not in myself. It's not in counsel. It's not out of a book. But it's what he directs me to. And so for me today, I felt like he drove me back to this book. He'll drive you to certain places and you don't know why, but out of that will come the expression of his love and his grace and his mercy for you. And out of that, you'll get to know him as what? Jesus said, call him what? Father. Father. And 3 times in the Word, it says, Abba, Father. And one of them is in the Garden of Gethsemane. When Jesus, falling prostrate, says, Abba, Father. Not my will,